Hi everyone, as mentioned, this is the last week of new material for distance learning. And because of Memorial Day yesterday, I hope you all had a great 3-day weekend. There are only 2 lessons this week. My question for you this week is, with the uncertainty of things in the fall and distance learning being a possibility, I would like some feedback from you. What worked well? What didn't work well? Do you have suggestions for how we can improve distance learning? If that becomes a reality this fall, I would really appreciate your help so I can make this experience better for students if necessary. All right, what we're learning this week is how to solve a quadratic equation. Remember, a quadratic equation is one that has a power of 2. Those are all the equations we've been factoring the last 2 weeks. The way we solve a quadratic equation is by using something called the zero product property. Zero, of course, refers to the number. Product is the answer for when you multiply, and then it's a property. So I gave you some examples here. Here's the basic example. If you have something times something equals 0, either that first something has to be 0, or that second something has to be 0. The only way to get 0 for an answer when you multiply is if you are multiplying by 0. And we did see some of that with our factoring. When we didn't have that constant on the end, we added 0, and 0 was always one of the numbers that we used to multiply to 0. Taking this up a step, this is what our factored forms have been looking like. We still have something times something equal to 0. It's just that our somethings aren't a plain old number. But the same property holds. Either that first something is 0, or that second something is 0. So let's take a look at how we can use that zero product property to solve our quadratic equations. Our first example is already in factored form. We have something times something equal to 0. So we set that first something, or the first piece of our equation, equal to 0. Or that second something, that second piece of our equation could be equal to 0. Now when we solved linear equations, which were equations that had just x, they didn't have any powers, we could only get one answer. When we solve a quadratic equation, we can get 2 answers because it has a power of 2. So that's how many possibilities we have for the answer for our quadratic equations. Solving our first equation, we add 2 to both sides to get x alone. So we get x could equal 2. That's one possible answer for our equation. Another possible answer is solving the second equation by subtracting 13 from both sides. And the second possible answer is negative 13. Looking back at our equation, if we put 2 in for x here, 2 minus 2 would give us 0, and 0 times something would give us 0. Cleaning up this mess a little bit. The second possibility is if we put negative 13 in for x. As a reminder, we would be putting them in for both x's, but this is the x I want to highlight because negative 13 plus 13 is 0. So 0 times something else would give us 0. So that's why those 2 answers would both work in this equation. Now we're going to apply our factoring skills to solve our quadratic equation. So we have to get it into the parentheses first, then we can set each piece equal to 0. Starting by setting up our t-chart, we're looking at what multiplies to 39 and adds to a negative 16. Well, the only numbers that go into 39 are 1 and 39, and 3 and 13. So I am thinking 3 times 13 is my better bet because that does add to 16, but it's positive. So to multiply to that positive and add to a negative, I'm going to make both of those numbers negative because then a negative times a negative is positive, and negative 3 plus negative 13 does give me that negative 16 that I was going for. So now instead of y equals, we don't have a y equals this time, we have an equals 0. So I'm just going to start my factoring right away, putting that x minus 3 and that x minus 13 into parentheses, setting each piece equal to 0, either that x minus 3 that we are multiplying by the x minus 13 equals 0. So one or the other has to equal 0. Solving for x, these are nice, easy equations to solve. We just have to cancel that number that we're adding or subtracting to the x. So our first solution is x equals 3. Solving my second equation by adding 13 to both sides, I get x equals 13. So the two answers to my quadratic equation are x equals 3 and x equals 13. Next factoring example is setting up that t-chart again. This time we're multiplying to a negative 20 and adding to a negative 19. In this case, in order to multiply to a negative, I need one positive and one negative number. I'm thinking I'm going to try 1 and 20. So in order to add to that negative 19, I need to have spent more money than I have. So I'm going to make the 20 negative, because 1 plus negative 20 does give me that negative 19. Again, no y equals on this one. We just start right off with the factoring. The x plus 1 and x minus 20 were the numbers we found to work. We are multiplying x plus 1 and x minus 20 to get 0. So 1 or the other term has to be 0. Solving my first equation, canceling that 1 with subtraction, we get x equals negative 1 for our first answer. And solving my second equation by adding 20, we get x equals 20 for our second answer. Two more, we have to look at all of these different special types so you can see the different possibilities for solutions. So this one, we're multiplying to that constant of 49, adding to the coefficient of x, which is 14. What numbers do that? 7 times 7 and 7 plus 7. So when I factor this, x plus 7 times x plus 7, I have the same thing multiplied by itself. Now I taught you guys that you can simplify that by putting the square on it, but for solving, we don't want to do that because that could make it more challenging for you to figure out how to solve it. We'll actually learn that process tomorrow. So what I'm going to do is just set one of these equal to 0 because I'm going to get the exact same answer from the other set of parentheses. For both of these, I would solve by subtracting 7 from both sides. When I do that, I get x equals negative 7. So this quadratic equation only has one answer. I believe what I said at the beginning of the video was that quadratic equations could have two answers because they have a power of 2, but they don't always have to have two answers, as we see here. And our last one, notice we're missing the constant term. So we could add 0 and set up the t-chart. I am going to do this with that shortcut that I showed you guys at the end of last week. They do have a common factor of x. So I can also just divide the x out from each term. X squared divided by x is x. On that second term, those x's cancel, leaving me with minus 36. Solving, I'm still going to set each piece equal to 0. The x doesn't need parentheses for factored form, but if you think about the parentheses being there, it might help you to see you're taking that x and multiplying it by the x minus 36. So those are the two possibilities. X equals 0, there's our one solution. Canceling that 36 with addition. And we get a second solution of x equals 36. As always, let me know if you have any questions on this lesson. I'm happy to help. We can set up a Zoom session. Let me know what you need, and take care.